So I'm starting to work on the deck beam that's going to go behind the front seat. There'll actually be two of them. If you look, this is the Monaco addendum for the utility version. And so it's this deck beam here. And then there'll be another one just behind it. You know, it says 12 inches here. I may not do quite 12 inches. We'll see after I get the engine installed. But so I'm going to work on this front one. The back one I'm not going to work on until after the engine's installed, but the front one I can put in place because then I can work on the front seat and get all that done. So if you notice though, it says use basically the beam, the arcs per the number 4 frame. And so if you remember, so frame 1, 2, 3, this actually is frame number 4, but since I'm doing a utility, I cut it out. So I'm gonna basically use that same arc of the pattern and relocate this. It'll actually be the front deck beam that I was just showing you that'll be right behind the front seat is going here, and then the rear one will be back here somewhere. And so I've got my full-size frame patterns, or frame pattern out that includes frame number 4, which is this one. And what you want is, of course, the top, which is the deck beam. So it starts here, and it's this one that goes up to the center line. So if you remember one of my earliest videos, I talk about how you trace the frame members onto lumber. So this will be using very similar technique. The nice thing is though, is I already have, you know, remember it's a mirror image, so I only have half of it here. So I have to have a center line, and then I will flip this drawing over, but I've already got on the back side, you can see those were already created when I did my layout board way back at the beginning, and that's how I made my original frame members. So I'll be using a similar technique as that. So here you can see I already have the center line drawn. Now this inner deck beam though doesn't need to be as long as the deck beam from frame number 4, because here's frame number 4. This is the cutoff part, but if you remember, it actually goes all the way back. I can kind of show when you build it, you can see that one with the bolt in it goes actually all the way back to this outer skin. So it's actually quite a bit. It's like 76 inches on the patterns, but I only need like 64 or so, or 65, because it'll be on the inside of the carlings, just like this relocated deck beam is. It's only mounted on the inside. So since I only need 65 inches, so from the outer edge, the outside of that beam, it'll go up. So I measured like 32.5 inches roughly. I had to square this off, but so that's where to go up, arcing up like that, and then arc down to here. So the total width will be 65 inches instead of the original plans per the pattern. So I'll show a little more about how to trace these frame members like this. So you can see I've got this pattern is actually clamped on, and the center line that I have marked on the board, I have little squares cut out, and so the center line of frame 4 I have lined up with those, and so this won't move. And then what I do is I will fold up. This allows you to kind of, it's the way I did it originally too. You have to be able to do this is get the carbon paper in there. So you're able to kind of fold it up like this. Kind of a pain. Get it all under there. Now when you originally do original frame members on the layout board, you put a piece of carbon paper, like I mentioned in my earlier video, down and up, so that way when you trace this on the layout board, you get the mirror image pattern. But so I'm going to get this in position, and then what I will do is probably clamp it over here somehow, or put a weight on it. And paint cans work good. Some people use those. So, but you have little squares cut out, and that, like for here, you need them to reference, like in this case, the center line. And so I'll get that set up, and I'll show that here in a minute. Okay, so I've got it in position. Now when I put the carbon paper under it, it covered up my little squares. So then what I do is I cut that square out of the carbon paper so I can make sure that my center line is still on that reference line. And then for me, I kind of take something like this and sort of stretch, just make sure this is laying flat. And I'll probably just hold it. And so what I'll do is I'll take this little wheel and a pattern tracing wheel, and then you just run it right along. And I'm also running along the center line, which actually I don't need to do that now, but and then I'll run it along these lines, and then flip this thing over and do the mirror image. One other thing I wanted to mention, so I've got the pattern obviously flipped over, and I've got it drawn on this side. I'm going to angle it a little bit up. I drew 1/2, and I realized I want to angle it up because I'm going to make 2 of these, and I want to try to use kind of use less length of the wood by actually cutting the other piece kind of upside down to this one, so I can sort of fit it up in here and not use as much linear feet of wood. But one thing again that I wanted to mention is so I have a center line reference, and so it gives me how to orient from this frame center line this way. Well, when you have these patterns out, I mean, there's a lot of play there. So what I do is I pick a spot. In this case, it's right out here. I cut a square, and I make a little crosshatch on one side, which I did. You can't really see it, but right here. And then I take my square like this, and I measure how far out reference to vertical is, and I flip it over. And I do this on the wood before I lay this down. And I do the same thing, measure out, so I put my crosshatch mark that way. That way, I know that I'm getting this paper. You can see there's a fair amount of play, even if you're trying to smooth it out, there's still a lot of play. And that way, I make sure it's roughly consistent from the center line on both sides. So it's pretty important to do that, actually. Otherwise, your frames could be out of whack. And the reality is these frames don't need to be perfect because you end up fairing them down. The inner side certainly doesn't matter on a deck beam that much, but the top side does. I mean, you want them as close as you could get, especially when I'm doing a deck beam like this, because it's not going to get faired that much. So now I've got it, that relocated deck beam number 4 traced out here. You can see it here, and then comes down like this. This was my original one that I kind of tried to erase, but so that's going to be my deck beam behind the front seat.